Picture this. The year is 1884. European leaders gather in Berlin, carving Africa into pieces on a map, treating entire civilizations like squares of land on a chessboard. That conference, the Berlin Conference, redrew Africa's future in ink and steel. But what if it never happened? What if Africa was never colonized? What if its empires, kingdoms, and nations charted their own destiny without foreign conquest? How different would the world look today? Your world, my world, if Africa's story was written only by Africans. Stay with me until the end, because by the time we're done, you'll see how an uncolonized Africa could have reshaped global politics, science, culture, and even the wars that defined the last 2 centuries. Our point of divergence is clear. The scramble for Africa never takes place. But why? Maybe European powers were weakened by prolonged wars at home, wars so draining that overseas conquest was too costly. Maybe the deadly force of malaria and other tropical diseases, instead of being overcome with quinine, remained a near impenetrable shield for African nations. Or maybe, just maybe, Africa's leaders, from the Zulu in the south to the Ashanti in the west, from Ethiopia in the east to the Berbers of the north, forged an unprecedented defensive alliance that no European power dared challenge. Whatever the trigger, the chain reaction is the same. Africa resists colonization. Its borders are not carved by outsiders. Its resources are not siphoned off to build foreign empires. Its people remain free to chart their own path. And from this single divergence point, history takes a radically different course. So, what happens first when Africa stays independent? Let's explore the early consequences, because they ripple farther than you might imagine. Without colonization, African politics follow a completely different trajectory. Strong kingdoms consolidate into federations. Mali doesn't fade into memory, it modernizes. Ethiopia isn't just a survivor of colonization, it becomes a continental leader. The Zulu kingdom forms alliances with neighbors, creating a southern bloc of power. The Ashanti and Yoruba strengthen West Africa's political influence. These alliances give Africa not just military security, but bargaining power on the world stage. Now think economics. Europe's industrial revolution thrived on African gold, diamonds, and rubber. In this alternate timeline, those resources stay in Africa, fueling African industries. Ports like Lagos, Alexandria, Cape Town, and Zanzibar become trade hubs, connecting Africa with Asia, the Middle East, and even South America on African terms. Imagine African-built railroads not transporting raw materials out of the continent, but linking major cities to boost regional economies. African currencies stabilize, trade unions form, and foreign powers negotiate rather than dictate. The ripple effect? Europe is weaker. Without Africa's resources, Britain struggles to maintain its empire. France lacks the wealth to dominate global politics. Even the Industrial Revolution might slow, or alternatively, African nations could pioneer their own industrial age, leapfrogging in technology with the wealth of their land. But economics is only half the story. What about culture, education, and identity? How would those evolve without colonization crushing them? Colonization didn't just steal resources, it tried to erase identities. In this alternate timeline, Africa's cultures never faced suppression on such a scale. Instead of colonial borders splitting ethnic groups apart, federations respect cultural and linguistic diversity. Indigenous languages thrive and evolve into written forms with mass literacy. Imagine Swahili becoming a global lingua franca, or Yoruba being taught in schools from Lagos to New York as a major world language. Education follows a different path. Centers of learning like Timbuktu expand into universities comparable to Oxford or Sorbonne. African philosophy enters mainstream global thought centuries earlier, influencing political science, ethics, and governance. Music, already one of Africa's greatest contributions to the modern world, dominates global trends even faster. Jazz, blues, hip-hop, and Afrobeat all have deeper roots and earlier global reach. Religion, too, takes unique turns. Christianity and Islam spread naturally, but remain distinctly African in character, merging with local customs in ways that strengthen cultural identity rather than replace it. The result? A continent not marginalized by the global narrative, but central to it. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. What role would Africa play in the wars that shaped the 20th century? Quick pause. If this alternate history has you hooked, make sure you like the video, subscribe, and tap the notification bell. We've only just scratched the surface. Next, we'll see how an uncolonized Africa could have changed the outcomes of World War I, World War II, and even the Cold War. Africa in the 20th century, wars and superpowers. In our real history, African soldiers fought in Europe's wars, but often as colonial subjects. In this timeline, African nations fight as equals or choose not to fight at all. Imagine World War I. Without colonial Africa, European powers lack crucial manpower and resources. The war either ends sooner or Africa enters as a decisive force, tipping the scales. World War II? Picture an industrialized, independent Africa resisting fascism alongside the Allies, not as colonies, but as partners. With Africa's resources under African control, Nazi Germany can't plunder North Africa, and the entire Mediterranean campaign shifts. The outcome may arrive faster, with fewer casualties, because Africa's strategic strength blocks Axis expansion. Then comes the Cold War. In real history, Africa became a battleground for proxy wars. But in this timeline, Africa refuses to be a pawn. Some nations align with the US, others with the Soviet Union, but many form their own bloc, an African-led version of the non-aligned movement. Africa becomes a superpower in its own right, influencing global politics, economics, and military strategy. And if Africa is a superpower by the late 20th century, what does the 21st century look like? By the 21st century, Africa could stand as one of the most powerful regions on Earth. Economically, African-led corporations rival Apple, Samsung, and Microsoft. Culturally, African cinema, music, and literature dominate global media. Politically, African nations sit at the head of international institutions, not as developing nations begging for aid, but as world leaders setting the rules. Global development looks radically different. Medicine advances sooner. After all, Africa's biodiversity and traditional healing knowledge fuel pharmaceutical breakthroughs. Space exploration might not be led by NASA or Roscosmos, but by African space agencies launching rockets from equatorial bases with unmatched efficiency. Climate change? With Africa leading sustainable energy innovations, solar, wind, and geothermal, the planet's fight against global warming begins decades earlier. This world is not just different, it's better prepared for survival. But this thought experiment isn't just about fantasy. It forces us to ask, what lessons does our real world need to learn from the one that never was? So, what if Africa was never colonized? We see a world reshaped by African strength. Global politics balanced, economies diversified, and cultures celebrated rather than suppressed. A world where Africa is not called developing, but is recognized as a global leader. History didn't give us this timeline. Colonization left scars still visible today. But by imagining what could have been, we understand the weight of what was lost, and perhaps glimpse the future Africa still deserves to build. If this journey into alternate history made you think, give this video a like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next what if that could change the way you see history. And tell me in the comments, if Africa had never been colonized, how different do you think the world would look today?